The clippers turned on with a sound like a small engine catching fire. Kellen Royce pressed the buzzing metal head against the back of Zahara's neck, not quickly, not accidentally slow, deliberate, savoring every second of it the way a man savors, something he has wanted to do for a long time, but never had an excuse to try. The first strip of dark hair fell to the floor. Zahara's jaw locked. Her wrists pulled hard against the electrical cord they'd used to tie her to the chair, but the knot held. Kellen laughed the kind of laugh that only exists in people who have never once been told no and meant it. Maddox Vale stood near the diner counter, with his phone out, filming, grinning like a boy who just discovered something cruel and wanted to keep a souvenir. Neither of them knew that 3 blocks away, a black armored sedan had just turned onto the street. Neither of them knew whose wife they had just decided to humiliate. If you've never been in a moment where someone takes something from you that you can never fully get back, your dignity, your sense of safety, the simple right to exist without being made into someone's entertainment, then you are lucky. But if you have, you know exactly what Zahara was feeling in that chair. Not fear, something colder than fear. A fury so deep it has nowhere to go yet. This is her story, and it does not end the way Kellen Royce expected. Before we go further, if you're watching this for the first time, hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because the stories we tell here do not go where you think they're going. Drop a like and let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Zahara Whitlock had been working the closing shift at Ray's Diner for going on 3 years, and in that time, she had learned 2 things about the job that no one warned her about when she applied. The first was that the floor mat behind the counter absorbed grease, the way old wood absorbs water, deep, permanent, impossible to fully clean, and that no matter how long you scrubbed it after a shift, you'd still smell it on your forearms when you got home. The second was that people showed you exactly who they were, around 10:30 at night, when the decent customers had already gone home, and the ones who stayed behind were either lonely, drunk, or testing something about themselves. They didn't have the courage to test during daylight hours. She had learned to read both kinds. She wasn't afraid of either. Not anymore. The diner sat on the corner of Hadley Street and 9th, sandwiched between a closed dry cleaner and a check-cashing place that pulled its security gate down at 8. Splitting. It wasn't a neighborhood that attracted trouble so much as it was a neighborhood that trouble passed through on its way to somewhere else. The fluorescence lights inside buzzed slightly, had buzzed for months, something in the ballast that the landlord kept promising to fix. Counter stools were vinyl, cracked along the seams. The menu hadn't changed since the previous owner. Ray himself had sold the place 4 years ago to a man named Victor Hong, who kept the name because he's changing it would cost more than it was worth. Zahara liked Victor. He was honest in the way only people who had struggled to hold something together could be honest, not idealistic, not naive, just clear-eyed about what things cost. Tonight, Victor had gone home early. His daughter had a fever. He'd left Zahara the keys and asked Marcus, the line cook, to stay until close. Marcus was 17 minutes into his cleanup routine when Kellen and Maddox walked in. Zahara heard the door before she saw them. The bell above it had a particular sound when someone pushed it hard, sharper, shorter, the sound of someone who expected the world to move out of their way. She was wiping down the far end of the counter and didn't turn around immediately. Splitting. That was a habit she'd developed, not out of rudeness, but because she had learned that the speed at which you turned around told certain kinds of customers something about the kind of night they were going to have. She turned around when she was ready. Kellen Royce was 26 years old and looked like someone had assembled him from a catalog of things that were supposed to signal confidence: the jaw, the build, the jacket, that cost more than Zahara's monthly rent. He had the eyes of someone who had never been seriously inconvenienced in his life, which gave him a particular kind of restlessness, a boredom so ingrained it had started to look like contempt. Maddox Vale was thinner, quieter, the kind of person who needed someone else to set the temperature of a room before he knew how to act in it. A sound like green wood splitting. He was already looking at his phone when they sat down at the counter, not because anything interesting was on it, but because it gave him something to do with his hands, while he waited to see how Kellen wanted to play this. "Kitchen's closed," Zahara said. "Not unfriendly, just accurate. I can get you coffee or a slice of pie if you want. Everything else is off the grill." Kellen looked at her the way people look at a sign they've decided doesn't apply to them. "We want food," he said, "real food. Tell the cook to fire something up." "Cook's cleaning the grill. That's what closing means." "I didn't ask what closing means." Zahara held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than he expected. "I know you didn't. I'm telling you anyway." Something shifted in Kellen's face. Not anger, not yet. More like the mild surprise of a man who had pressed a button and gotten an unexpected result. He glanced at Maddox. Maddox was watching now, phone lowered. "You know who my father is?" Kellen said. Zahara had been asked that question before, in different forms, by different men. It was always a question shaped like a threat. She picked up her cloth and kept wiping the counter. "No. And it doesn't change the fact that the grill is off." That was the moment. She felt it the way you feel weather changing, a shift in air pressure, something in the room going tight. Kellen got off his stool, slowly, deliberately. He walked to the door, turned the deadbolt, and flipped the sign from open to closed. Zahara put the cloth down. "You need to unlock that door," she said. The friendliness was completely gone from her voice now. In its place was something flat and direct, the voice she used when she needed someone to understand that she was serious. Kellen turned around. He smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just decided the night had gotten interesting. "Call your cook out here," he said. "Tell him to go home. You and me are going to have a conversation." "I'm not doing that." Zahara. He'd read her name tag. The way he said it was calculated, intimate, familiar, a small invasion. "I'm not asking." Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway then, still holding a scrub brush, his face going through a rapid sequence of emotions that landed somewhere between confusion and fear. He was 19 years old. He was not paid enough for whatever this was. Zahara looked at him and made a decision that she would later reconsider from multiple angles, turning it over. The way you turn over a stone to see what's under it. Unsure whether she'd made the right call or the only call available to her. "Go home, Marcus," she said quietly. "Zahara, lock the back door behind you. Go." Marcus looked at Kellen. Kellen looked back at him with an expression that settled the question without words. Marcus grabbed his jacket from the hook near the prep station and left through the kitchen. The back door clicked shut. Zahara and Kellen were alone, except for Maddox, who had pulled out his phone again. "Smart," Kellen said. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something." He was moving toward her now, slow, unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world. "I come into a place and I expect to be treated a certain way. I don't think that's complicated." "It's not," Zahara said. "It's just not happening here." He stopped about 3 feet from her. He was close enough that she could smell the alcohol. On him, expensive whiskey, the kind that didn't smell cheap, even when someone had had too much of it. "Why are you working in a place like this?" he said. He looked around the diner with open contempt. "Seriously. You seem smart. You could be doing something better than wiping counters at midnight." "I like it here." "You like it here," he said it like the words tasted strange. "That's almost sad. I'm going to need you to leave." "We're not leaving." Zahara reached for the phone on the wall behind the counter. She had it in her hand, was already dialing, when Kellen moved faster than she'd expected, given how much he'd clearly had to drink, and grabbed her wrist. The phone clattered against the wall, swinging on its cord. The physical contact changed everything. Zahara pulled back hard. She caught him across the forearm with her elbow, not a trained movement, just instinct, the body protecting itself the only way it knew how, in the half-second before thought caught up with reaction. Connected. Kellen swore, and then Maddox was off his stool, and the two of them together were something different from what either one of them was alone. She fought. That mattered. She fought hard enough that it took both of them longer than it should have, and she left marks on Kellen's forearm that he would still have the next morning and the morning after that. But she was one person against two, and eventually the electrical cord came off one of the hanging light fixtures near the back wall, and they had her arms pinned and tied behind her, to the wooden chair near the window. She was breathing hard. Her lip had been split. Somewhere in the struggle, she could taste the copper of it, feel the specific sting of broken skin. One of the overhead lights was swinging slightly from where someone had grabbed the fixture. The diner looked strange in the moving light, shadows shifting in irregular patterns across the floor and the counter and the two men standing over her. Kellen wiped blood from the scratch on his forearm. He looked at it, then looked at her, and his expression had moved past contempt into something uglier and more personal. "You want to act like you're better than this place," he said. "Like you're better than what you are." Zahara said nothing. She had made a decision somewhere in the last 2 minutes to stop spending words on him. She could feel the fear. It was there. It was real. It moved through her chest in waves, but underneath it, or maybe alongside it, was something that had nothing to do with fear. She was angry, not the hot, reactive anger she'd felt when he grabbed her wrist. Something older and steadier, the kind of anger that doesn't need to perform itself. She looked at the clock on the wall behind the counter. 10:51 p.m. Maddox said something to Kellen low. She couldn't fully make it out. She heard her own name, heard the word hair, saw Kellen's expression shift into something that made her stomach drop. He walked behind the counter. She heard him opening drawers. He came back with the electric clippers. Victor kept in the back cabinet, the ones used for cutting the frayed edges, off the fabric booth seats, not for anything else, not meant for skin. Not meant for this. "Let's see how confident you are," Kellen said, without all of this. He clicked the clippers on. Zahara closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Just 2. Not because she was giving in to it, not because she was surrendering, but because she needed those 2 seconds to make a choice about what the next few minutes were going to cost her and what they were not going to cost her. They were not going to cost her her composure. They were not going to cost her herself. She opened her eyes. She looked at the clock. 10:53 p. The clippers touched the back of her neck, and the first strip of her hair fell to the floor, and she did not make a sound. Not one sound. She breathed through her nose, slow and controlled, and she watched the clock, and she kept her face still the way. Still water is still not because nothing is happening beneath it, but because it is choosing not to show you what is. Kellen said things while he did it. She processed almost none of it. Her mind had gone to a particular kind of place, that it went sometimes in her worst moments, not far away, not dissociated, but very clear and very narrow, focused on just one thing at a time. Clock, 10:55. Maddox filmed it. She could see him from the corner of her eye, phone raised, grinning at the screen. She noted that too, filed it away. The way you note the details of something while it is happening to you, because some part of your brain is already thinking about after, about what comes next, about what use you might eventually make of what you are living through right now. The hair kept falling. She felt the air on the back of her scalp, then on the crown, the sensation strange and cold and intimate in the worst possible way. She felt the nicks where the clipper caught skin, small, sharp moments of pain that she absorbed without flinching. Kellen was laughing. Zahara looked at the clock. 10:57. And then she heard it before she saw it. The low sound of a powerful engine slowing to a stop outside. Headlights swept briefly across the wall through the gap between the drawn blinds. A door opened and closed. Silence. Kellen heard it too. He stopped. He looked toward the window. The clippers were still running in his hand, buzzing in the quiet of the diner. And in that buzzing silence, Zahara finally allowed herself the one thing she had been withholding for the past 6 minutes. Not tears. Not yet. Just the smallest breath of something that was almost relief. Almost. Because whoever was outside that door had not yet come in, and she did not know for certain who it was. A spine and splitting, and she was still tied to a chair in a diner with 2 men who had just spent the better part of 10 minutes reminding her how little they thought she mattered. But she had watched the clock because she knew. Some part of her had known that the night had a shape, and that the shape was not finished yet. The door handle moved. The deadbolt, the one Kellen had turned himself, with such casual confidence, such certainty that he had sealed this space and made it his turned back. The door opened. Kang Mu-jin stepped inside. He was 41 years old and carried himself the way men carry themselves when they have not been afraid of a room in a very long time. He was not large in the way people expected powerful men to be large. He was contained everything about him, pulled inward, economical, nothing wasted. He wore a charcoal jacket over a dark shirt, no tie, and his hands were at his sides with a particular stillness of hands that were not nervous. He looked at Zahara first. His face did not break open the way a face breaks when someone is frightened for another person. It did not go wide with emotion or loosen with horror. What happened was much smaller and much more specific. His eyes moved across her, with a precision that registered everything. The cord on her wrists, the blood at the corner of her mouth, the hair on the floor, clippers still running in Kellen Royce's hand, and then his expression settled into something so completely still that it stopped being readable as an emotion at all. Kellen turned around slowly. He still had the clippers in his hand. He looked at Mu-jin. He looked at the door that had somehow been unlocked from the outside. He looked back at Mu-jin. "Who are you?" Kellen said. His voice had the particular quality of a man trying to re-establish the size of a room he had suddenly realized might be larger than he thought. Mu-jin did not answer immediately. He walked toward Zahara. Kellen stepped sideways to block him. Instinct reflex, the movement of a man whose body was still 3 seconds behind his brain in understanding what kind of situation this actually was. Mu-jin stopped. He looked at Kellen with an expression that was not threatening, not theatrical, not designed to perform anything for anyone in the room. A sound sinuous. It was simply a look of complete and total assessment, the look of someone who has already calculated what they are dealing with and found it neither surprising nor particularly interesting. "Move," Mu-jin said. One word. Kellen moved. Mu-jin walked past him and crouched in front of Zahara's chair. He produced a folding knife from his jacket pocket and cut the cord from her wrists. Her arms came forwards, slowly circulation, finding its way back through compressed veins, the specific deep ache of restored feeling. His hands moved to her wrists and checked them, then to her face fingertips, not palms, careful and specific. He looked at her lip. He looked at her scalp. Zahara looked back at him. In the 3 years since she had married Kang Mu-jin, she had watched people react to him with fear, with deference, a sound like green wood splitting, with the particular kind of performance that people put on when they were in the presence of someone they understood to be dangerous. She had spent most of those 3 years deliberately building a life that existed outside that reality-raised diner. Her own name, her own hours, the coffee she bought from the cart on Hadley before every shift, the way Marcus called her Z and meant it as warmth. A life that was hers. That was about her. She looked at her husband's face and felt the specific grief of understanding that the line she had drawn around that life was not as clear as she had wanted it to be. Mu-jin said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, "Just for her," he said, "I've got you." Zahara nodded once. Behind him, Kellen had found his voice again. "You have any idea who my father is?" Mu-jin stood up. He turned around. He looked at Kellen Royce with an expression that, if Zahara had been asked to describe it afterward, she would have said was almost sympathetic. The way a person looks at something that is about to have a very hard education. "Senator Everett Royce," Mu-jin said. He said it the way you say a fact that doesn't need to be emphasized because it is simply true. "I know your father. I know his accounts. I know his arrangements. I know the things he has done that he believes no one else knows." Kellen's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. "It's not," he started. "You made a decision tonight," Mu-jin said. "I'd like you to sit with what that means." He turned back to Zahara. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, without asking whether she wanted it. She pulled it around herself. It was warm, and the warmth hit her in a way she hadn't been prepared for. The way unexpected warmth sometimes undoes the composure you've been holding carefully in place, stitch by careful stitch, for the last hour. She looked at the clock, 10:59. She had made it. She looked at the floor, at her own hair scattered across the linoleum in the shifting fluorescent light. And she breathed in once through her nose and out through her mouth, and she held herself together through an effort of will that she would not fully appreciate until much later. when she was somewhere safe and could let herself feel the full weight of what the night had cost her. But that was later. Right now in this diner, with her husband standing between her and the two men who had spent an hour trying to make her feel like nothing, she kept her straight and her chin level, and she looked at Kellen Royce over Mu-jin's shoulder with an expression that said, very clearly, without any words at all, "I told you I wasn't afraid of you." Kellen's phone rang in his pocket. He didn't answer it. Outside through the gap in the blinds, Zahara could see the shapes of other men arriving quiet, unhurried, the way Mu-jin's people always moved, like they had already accounted for every variable and found nothing worth rushing about. The night was not over, but its shape had changed completely. And Kellen Royce, a sound like Greenwood splitting, who had walked into Ray's diner 90 minutes ago, believing that his name and his father's money made him the most powerful thing in any room he chose to enter, was beginning to understand slowly. The way men like him always understood things too late, exactly how wrong he had been. Mu-jin did not raise his voice once. That was the thing Zahara noticed first. Sitting in the chair with his jacket around her shoulders, and the taste of blood still on her lip, he never raised his voice. Not when he was talking to her. A sound like green wood splitting, not when he finally turned back to face the two men who had spent the last hour making her feel like something they could discard when they were finished with it. His voice stayed at the same level it always was, even in the worst moments she had seen him navigate over 3 years of marriage, which were not a small number of moments. Level. Controlled. The voice of a man who had learned long ago that volume was for people who still needed to convince someone of something. Kellen was talking. He had been talking for about 40 seconds straight, and his voice had gone up with every sentence, not because he was angry, Zahara realized, but because he was scared, and the fear was doing what fear does to men who have never had to manage it, making them loud, making them reach for the biggest thing in their arsenal, which in Kellen Royce's case was always the same thing. "My father will bury you," Kellen said. "I don't care who you think you are. You understand what that means? My father has people in this city that—" "Your father," Mu-jin said, "has 19 days. Kellen stopped. The diner went quiet enough that Zahara could hear the buzzing of the overhead light again, still swinging slightly on its cord from where Maddox had grabbed it during the struggle. Maddox himself hadn't moved from his spot near the end of the counter. He had put his phone away at some point in the last 2 minutes. She'd noticed but hadn't remarked on it. The way you notice peripheral things, when your whole body is still running on adrenaline, and the edges of your perception are sharp and strange. 19 days, Mu-jin repeated. He was not looking at Kellen when he said it the second time. He was looking at his own hands, adjusting the cuff of his shirt, and the casualness of the gesture was frightening than anything theatrical could have been. That's how long before the first set of documents arrives at the federal building on Commerce Street. I've had the timeline set for a while. Tonight just changes one variable. Kellen stared at him. Something was working behind his eyes, calculation, disbelief, the desperate mental math of a man trying to determine whether what he was hearing was a bluff. "What documents?" he said. It came out flat. The bravado had dropped out of his voice like a floor giving way. Mu-jin finally looked at him. "You should call your father," Mu-jin said. "Not because it'll help, but because he deserves to know that it was you who made this happen tonight." That landed. Zahara watched it land on Kellen's face the way a stone lands in still water, the impact small at the surface, the disruption spreading outward in rings. Kellen's jaw tightened. His right hand came up to his forearm. The scratch she had left there, already darkening at the edges, and he pressed it briefly. An unconscious gesture, the body checking its own damage. Maddox spoke for the first time since Mu-jin had walked in. "Kel." His voice was low, careful. The voice of a man who had read the room better than his friend and was now trying to steer them both toward whatever exit still existed. "Kel, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Kellen said without looking at him. Maddox shut up. The back door opened. Zahara turned her head. A man had come in through the kitchen. She hadn't heard him enter, which meant he had been there already, or had come through the alley access that Victor used for deliveries. He was Korean, mid-30s, built like someone who spent his time doing things that actually required physical strength rather than just performing it. He had a small scar beneath his left eye and the particular expression of a man who was waiting to be given a task. Han Seok-yu, she knew him, had seen him at enough of Mu-jin's events, always positioned slightly behind and to the right, always watching the room the way she imagined. A doctor watches a patient systematically, looking for something specific, not distracted by what wasn't relevant. He looked at Mu-jin, a small nod. Mu-jin returned it, and in that exchange was an entire conversation that happened without a word. Kellen looked from Mu-jin to Han and back again. The muscles in his neck had gone rigid. "You can't do anything to me in here," Kellen said. "Not here. Not in public. Whatever you think." "This diner has been closed for 45 minutes, Mu-jin said. The manager went home early. The cook left out the back. The security camera on that corner, he gestured toward the upper angle of the wall near the entrance where a small black dome sat mounted above the door, has had a hardware issue since about 10:20 tonight. The filing for that is already in the building management system." Maddox made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound that came out of him involuntarily, air escaping under pressure. Kellen's eyes were moving fast now, landing on things and skipping off them: the door, the camera. Han near the kitchen entry, Mu-jin 2 feet in front of him, looking for the gap, the angle, the version of this where the math still worked out in his favor. "I know what you're thinking," Mu-jin said, and his voice had something in it now that was almost tired, almost sad in the way that someone is sad about a thing they have seen many times before and have long since stopped being surprised by. "You're thinking there's still a version of this where your father fixes it. There isn't, not because I'm going to stop him. He's going to stop himself when he finds out what you did tonight." "He'll back me," Kellen said, automatically, like a reflex. "He'll try." A pause. "For about 12 hours. Then he'll make the calculation you're making right now, and he'll make it better than you because he's had longer to practice." Something went out of Kellen's face. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the specific collapse of a particular belief, the kind of belief that had been load-bearing for so long that the person holding it had stopped noticing it was there. The way you stop noticing the foundation of a house until the day it starts to shift. Kellen Royce had believed on some fundamental level that his father's power was unconditional, that it extended to him by proximity, that being Everett Royce's son was a form of protection so total that nothing outside it could reach him. He was watching that belief come apart in real time. Mu-jin turned away from him. He turned back to Zahara, and the shift in his face when he looked at her again was visible, not dramatic, not performed, but real, the way a body shifts when it moves from tension into something else. Crouched in front of her again. "Can you stand?" "Yes," Zahara said. She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she stood anyway. Her legs were unsteady for a moment, the adrenaline metabolizing, the body beginning to register what it had spent the last hour holding at bay, and Mu-jin put one hand under her elbow. Just a point of contact, just enough. She made herself take her own weight. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her. He had the particular way of looking at her that she had never been able to fully describe to herself, not protective, not possessive, just very attentive, the look of someone for whom she was the most important variable in the room. "Your lip needs—" "I said I'm fine, Mu-jin. A beat." "Okay," he said. She turned and looked at Kellen. The clippers were on the floor where he dropped them at some point in the last several minutes. Her hair was still scattered across the linoleum, dark clumps of it, more than she'd registered while it was happening, the quantity of it making the reality land differently now that she was standing and could see the whole of the floor. Her hand moved toward her scalp before she could stop it. She felt the unevenness of what was left, the patches, the tracks the clipper had left. She pulled her hand back down. Kellen was watching her. "I want to go," she said. She was talking to Mu-jin, but she kept her eyes on Kellen when she said it, because she wanted him to see her leave on her own terms, standing with her husband's coat around her shoulders and not a single tear on her face. Mu-jin nodded. "We'll go." Han stepped aside from the kitchen entrance. Mu-jin guided Zahara toward the front door, his hand at the small of her back, and she walked through the diner she had worked in for 3 years, past the counter she had wiped down 10,000 times, past the booth where the night regulars sat, past the coffee machine with its slow drip and its particular smell, and out into the air. The night was cold and damp, and she breathed it in like it was something she'd been waiting for. Outside, 2 men she recognized from Mu-jin's security detail stood near the armored sedan, positioned casually, watching the street. One of them opened the rear door when he saw her, without being asked. Zahara got in. The leather was cold. The interior smelled like Mu-jin's office, something cedar-adjacent, clean, with the faint overlay of the specific kind of order that very controlled people maintained around themselves. The window was tinted black. Through it, the street looked like a photograph of itself, the same objects and lights, but flattened, distant. She heard the diner door open and then close. Mu-jin got in beside her. He did not speak immediately. He reached into the center console and produced a small first aid kit, white, compact, one of several she knew he kept in every vehicle because she had once mocked him about it. Years ago, told him it was excessive. And he had said without irony that things were only excessive until they were needed. She hadn't argued that point again. He opened it and took out a sealed packet of antiseptic wipe. He held it out to her. She took it, opened it, pressed it to her lip. The sting made her eyes water, not enough to produce tears, just the automatic response of nerve endings doing their job. Camera, she said. Already handled. He's fine. 2 of our people followed him home. She absorbed that. Outside, through the tinted glass, she could see the diner's sign raise, in red lettering that had always struck her as slightly too cheerful for the neighborhood. The lights were still on inside. She could see shadows moving behind the blinds, the shapes of people doing things that she was choosing, very deliberately, not to think about too carefully right now. Maddox had his phone out, she said. He was filming. I know. There's video won't be. She pressed the antiseptic wipe harder against her lip. The sting was grounding. She focused on it. You had the security camera handled before you came in, she said. It wasn't a question. She was just saying the thing out loud, following the logic of it to its end, because she had learned over 3 years that the way to understand what Mu-jin had done was to start from the outcome and work backward. Yes, he said. How long were you outside? A pause. Brief, but she caught it. Long enough, he said. She turned and looked at him properly for the first time since he'd walked into the diner. How long, she said. He met her eyes. About 4 minutes, he said. She felt the anger move through her clean, hot, specific. Not at him. Not exactly at him. The anger was more complicated than that, pointed at something that didn't have a clean name yet, and because it didn't have a clean name, she kept her voice level when she spoke. You watched. I needed to assess. She stopped. Pressed the wipe to her lip again. Breathed through her nose. Okay, Zahara. I said okay. She turned back to the window. I know why. I understand the logic. I'm just processing. Give me a minute. He gave her the minute. Outside, one of the exterior security men was speaking quietly into a phone. The diner sign buzzed in the dark. My hair is on the floor in there, she said. Mu-jin said nothing. I worked there for 3 years, she said. Every single closing shift. I know every scratch on every surface in that place. I know which stool wobbles and which one doesn't. I know that the tile near the back booth is cracked because someone dropped a bus tub full of plates about 8 months ago and Victor couldn't afford to fix it. She paused. I know what the light sounds like when it's about to go. I know, Mu-jin said quietly. It was mine, she said. That's what it was mine. The car was quiet for a moment. Then Mu-jin said, it still is. She turned to look at him again. His face was unreadable in the dim interior light, but his eyes were on her, with that same full attention they always held when he was with her. Attention that had unnerved her when they first met, because she hadn't been accustomed to being looked at like she was worth that much focus. Is it? She said. He didn't answer immediately, and she appreciated that the willingness to sit with the question rather than reflexively smooth it over. What happened in that diner, he said finally, is not going to define what that place was to you. Unless you let it. Don't do that, she said. Don't give me the clean version. I'm not. You are. The clean version is the one where I walk out of there with my head up and none of it sticks. But it sticks, Mu-jin. It already sticks. I can feel it. She pressed 2 fingers lightly to the side of her scalp, where one of the clipper tracks had caught skin. Physically sticks. He looked at her hand on her head. Something crossed his face that he controlled before it fully arrived. I know, Sade said. What's happening in there right now? Don't worry about what is happening in that diner right now. He looked at her steadily. He made a decision she could watch him make. The shift in his expression that happened when he chose to tell her something complete instead of something managed. Kellen and Maddox are being secured, he said. Seokgyu and 2 others. They'll be transported in about 15 minutes. The diner will be cleaned and locked. No one will be able to access it tonight. Secured, she repeated. Yes. Are you going to hurt them? I'm going to dismantle everything their family has spent 30 years building. She looked at him. That's not what I asked. I know. Another silence. Kellen is going to have the worst years of his life, Mu-jin said. That's not me being merciful. It's me being accurate. Killing someone ends their story. What I'm going to do to the Royce family doesn't end anything. It just changes what kind of story they get to live. Zahara looked at her own hands. The cord marks on her wrists had started to bruise. She could see the discoloration even in the low light, the line where the cord had bitten in during the struggle. She pulled her sleeve down to cover it. I'm not going back there, she said. You don't have to the diner. I mean, I'm done. I'm not going back. She felt the weight of that even as she said it. 3 years, the coffee cart on Hadley. Marcus calling her Z. The wobbling stool, and the cracked tile, and the fluorescent light that buzzed like a bad thought you couldn't quiet. All of it. Gone not because she chose to leave it, but because 2 men with too much money and too little consequence had made it impossible to hold. The grief of that was specific and real, and she didn't try to argue with it. Okay, Mu-jin said. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say? She thought about it. Nothing, she said. Okay is right. The front door of the sedan opened, and one of the security men leaned in briefly, speaking to Mu-jin in Korean Rapid, clipped, the tone of a report, delivered to someone who would receive it without needing it repeated. Mu-jin responded in 3 words. The door closed. We need to move, Mu-jin said. Where are we going? Home, I need to make some calls. The engine was already running. The car pulled away from the curb, and Zahara turned in her seat and watched the diner recede through the rear window, the red sign, the lit interior, the blinds drawn against the night. It looked the same as it always did. It looked like nothing had happened there at all. She faced forward. The city moved past the windows, wet streets reflecting traffic signals in long orange and red streaks, the particular visual language of a city. At nearly midnight, the people who were out because they worked, the people who were out because they couldn't sleep, the gap between those 2 populations smaller than anyone comfortable ever admitted. She had belonged to the first group for most of her life. Had needed to belong to it. There had been years before Mu-jin, before everything that followed meeting, when the closing shift at a diner was not a choice but a necessity, when the difference between making rent and not making rent was measured in tips and the willingness to stay past when your feet had given out. She had not forgotten that, had not wanted to forget it. It was part of why she had kept going back to Ray's, even after the money stopped being necessary. Some refusal to let that part of herself dissolve. Some insistence on remembering what it felt like to be tired in a particular honest way at the end of a particular honest kind of work. She thought about Kellen Royce saying, "You could be doing something better than wiping counters at midnight." She thought about the way he'd said it, not even cruel. In that moment, just genuinely baffled. The way someone is baffled by a choice they find incomprehensible because they have never been in a position where the choice wasn't available to them. Car slowed for a light. He filmed it, she said. Mu-jin looked at her Maddox. He had his phone out the whole time. He filmed what they did. She turned to face him. Is that going to? It doesn't exist anymore, Mu-jin said. You're sure? Yes. She absorbed that. She should have felt something clean about it, relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Instead, she felt something more complicated, the strange knowledge that the evidence of what had been done to her was gone, and that its being gone was both protection and its own small violence. The way that very bad nights sometimes disappeared without leaving proof, and the person they happened to continue to carry what no one could see. His father is going to know by morning, Mu-jin said. It wasn't directed at her exactly. He was thinking out loud in the careful way he thought out loud sometimes, laying the sequence out in the air between them like a map he was consulting. Kelland will try to reach him tonight. The call won't go through. You already, yes. When did you? On the way over. He glanced at her. I had about 12 minutes in the car. She stared at him. There was a version of that which should have alarmed her, the speed of it, the infrastructure that allowed it, the fact that a 12-minute drive could set in motion something that would determine the trajectory of a man's entire political career. She knew this about her husband, had known it for a long time. The knowledge lived in her the way certain other pieces of knowledge lived in her present, incorporated, neither entirely comfortable nor entirely unwelcome. What happens to Everett Royce, she said. He loses everything he built on things he didn't have the right to build on, and the things he built legitimately. Mu-jin was quiet for a moment. There aren't many of those, he said. She turned back to the window. The penthouse was 40 minutes away in this traffic. She thought about walking into it tonight, about the specific quality of those rooms the city laid out below the glass, like something owned, the silence that had always struck her as a particular kind of wealth, the absence of the buzz and press and noise she had grown up inside of, and which still felt, on some nights, more like home than any quiet room. She thought about the bathroom mirror. She thought about what she would see in it when she got there. She did not look at her reflection in the window. She folded her hands in her lap, left over right, and watched the city, and did not let herself think too far ahead. Beside her, Mu-jin made the first of what would be many phone calls that night. His voice was low even, precise. Korean. Then a switch to English for a single instruction she caught clearly. Don't touch the accounts until I confirm the documents are positioned. Then back to Korean. Then a pause in which he listened to something she couldn't hear, and she watched his jaw tighten by a fraction. The specific tension of a man receiving information he had not entirely anticipated, but was already filing into his plans, adjusting weight, redistributing pressure. She recognized that tension. She had learned to read his face the way you learn to read any landscape you have spent real time in, not perfectly, not completely, but well enough to know when the weather was changing before anyone had announced it. Something was different. She waited. He ended the call. A long pause. What? She said. He looked at her. There's a complication, he said. What kind? He was quiet for another second. Outside the window, the city continued its indifferent motion. The emergency at the warehouse tonight, he said slowly. The one that pulled your security detail. She felt the shift in her chest before she understood it. Cold, specific feeling of a thing that seemed accidental beginning to reveal its shape. It wasn't an emergency, she said. Mu-jin's jaw was tight. Staged, he said. Someone inside my organization called that alert. Carr was very quiet. Someone who knew your schedule, he said. Who knew which night you'd be working. Who knew your detail would be pulled. He looked at her, and his eyes held something she had never seen in them before, in quite this form. Not fear, not exactly, but the specific, stripped-bare look of a man who has been betrayed and is still in the process of locating the full dimension of it. Someone who wanted you unprotected tonight. Zahara felt the information move through her body the way cold moves through a room, not a single point of impact, but a pervasive shift in temperature, reaching everywhere at once. This wasn't random, she said. No, they knew who I was. Mu-jin held her gaze. Someone told them, he said. The sedan moved through the city. The lights outside blurred in the damp air. Somewhere behind them, in a diner on the corner of Hadley and 9th, two men were being held in the dark by people who did not make noise. And somewhere in the city, someone who had sat at Mu-jin's table, who had spoken in his rooms and operated under his name, had made a decision. Zahara looked at her husband's face. She understood, fully and completely, that the night they had both thought was ending had not ended at all. It had only just changed into something else. The penthouse elevator opened at 11:47 p. and Zahara walked in ahead of Mu-jin and went straight to the kitchen sink and turned the cold water on and held both wrists under it. The bruising had deepened during the drive. The cord marks ran in a clean line across each wrist, not severe enough to need medical attention, severe enough that she could not look at them for more than a few seconds without feeling the specific physical memory of the chair, the knot, the helplessness of arms that could not move where she's told them to go. Cold water helped. It was something to do with her hands that made sense. Mu-jin came in behind her and set his phone on the counter and stood for a moment with his hand on the back of a kitchen chair, looking at her. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing, Zahara." I said I'm fine. He didn't push it. He went to the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one she never used, because it required a step stool to reach, and came back with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured 2 fingers into each and set one on the counter within her reach, without commenting on whether she would want it. She turned off the water, dried her hands on a dish towel, picked up the glass. The whiskey was warm going down, and she stood at the counter and drank half of it in one movement, and then set the glass down and looked at the wall. "Tell me what you know," she said. Mu-jin had his own glass in his hand, but he hadn't drunk from it. He was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, the glass held loosely in one hand, and he was looking at the floor with the expression she had come to recognize as his thinking face, not blank, not closed. The specific quality of a mind turning something over very carefully, looking for the join, the seam, the place where things had been assembled incorrectly. "The warehouse call came in at 9:43, he said. "Reported as a fire suppression failure in Section 4. That's the cold storage section. Temperature-sensitive inventory. Significant loss potential if the system goes down. Seok-yu made the call to pull your detail and redirect them, because the protocol for Section 4 is immediate response. No delay, no half measures. Standard protocol, yes. Which means whoever staged it knew the protocol, knew exactly which section of which facility would produce a mandatory immediate response and pull every available body." He paused. The fire suppression system was fine. The alert was triggered remotely using access codes that are rotated every 72 hours. Zahara set her glass down. "Someone with current access," she said. "Yes. How many people have current access to those codes?" "As of this rotation, 11. "Do you know which of the 11? He was quiet for a second. "I have a strong suspicion," he said. "I don't have confirmation yet." She turned and looked at him fully. He was still looking at the floor. His jaw had that fractional tightness she had clocked in the car, the specific tension of a man holding something in because the time to put it down hadn't arrived yet. "Who?" she said. He looked up. "I need to confirm it first," he said. "Mu-jin. I'm not going to give you a name until I'm certain. Because if I give you a name and I'm wrong, that does damage that can't be undone. And if I give you a name and I'm right..." He stopped. Something moved through his face. "I need you to let me work through the confirmation process. Tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. She understood the logic. She always understood the logic. That was one of the particular textures of being married to a man like Mu-jin, not that he was irrational, not that he made bad decisions, but that his decisions were made inside a framework that had rules she had not entirely signed up for, and sometimes those rules required her to wait in places where waiting felt like its own kind of injury. She said, "Yes. And while you're confirming, what am I doing?" "Sleeping, ideally." She almost laughed. It came out as a short exhale that wasn't quite either thing. "Okay," she said. She picked up her glass and finished the whiskey and set it in the sink and went to the bedroom. She did not sleep. She lay on her back on top of the covers with her arms at her sides, and she stared at the ceiling. And she listened to Mu-jin moving through the apartment, the low sound of his voice on the phone, in the study, the specific cadence of Korean spoken at close to midnight by someone who was not tired, but was very focused, the occasional pause that meant he was receiving something, the slight shift in tone that meant whatever he'd received required adjustment. She cataloged the sounds, the way she had cataloged the diner, the particular creak of the door when it wasn't fully latched, the hum of the city 40 floors below, The almost inaudible sound of the elevator in the building shaft that happened every time a neighboring unit on this floor was accessed. Around 12:40, she heard the study door open and then close properly, the click of the latch, and then silence for about 3 minutes, and then the bedroom door opened and Mu-jin came in. Kept her eyes on the ceiling. He sat on the edge of the bed. She felt the mattress shift under his weight, the small change in the room's gravity. He didn't speak immediately. "You confirmed it," she said. Pause. "Yes," he said. She waited. "Jin-ho," he said. The name hit her differently than she expected. She had prepared herself, or tried to prepare herself, in the way you try to prepare yourself for information. You know is going to cost you something, but she had built the preparation around an abstract name, an unknown, and Jin-ho was not abstract. Choi Jin-ho had been with Mu-jin for 8 years. He was 34. He had a younger sister in Busan, and a fondness for terrible instant noodles that he ate at his desk. And he had once spent 40 minutes helping Zahara troubleshoot a problem with her laptop when Mu-jin was out of the city, with the patient focus of someone who genuinely enjoyed fixing things. She had given him a Christmas card last year. She turned her head and looked at Mu-jin's profile. "Jin-ho," she said. "Yes. You're certain the access logs are clean on the surface." But Seok-gyu pulled the second routing data from the alert system, the kind of data that gets written automatically and doesn't occur to most people to clean because most people don't know. It exists. His voice was flat. Factual. The voice of a man delivering a report to himself. Jin-ho's authentication token was used to trigger the alert. He used a relay to route it through a dormant security node, which is why it didn't flag initially. But the token itself doesn't lie. Could someone have stolen his token? Considered that. Seok-gyu is running the thread right now. A pause. But Jin-ho left the building at 9:21 tonight, 22 minutes before the alert was triggered. He gave a reason personal matter, cleared by his own supervisory sign-off. His own sign-off. He approved his own absence. Zahara sat up. She did it slowly, swinging her legs over the side of the bed and sitting with her feet on the floor, and she looked across the darkened room at the city, below the window, that vast lit thing, all those lit windows and moving lights, all those lives that had no idea tonight was happening. He was clearing the field, she said. Yes. He made sure he wasn't in the building when it happened. Yes, and Kellen and Maddox, they knew who I was. Kellen's father knows my name, has known it. For years, we've had enough proximity through certain financial arrangements that Everett Royce is aware of who I am and what I do. Whether Kellen specifically knew you were my wife, or whether he was simply told that the woman working the closing shift at that diner was connected to me in a way that made her a useful target. He stopped. His hands were on his knees, flat, and she could see from the angle of his shoulders that the muscles across his back were rigid. I don't know the full shape of the arrangement yet. But someone told Kellen Royce that attacking you would create a specific problem for me. A distraction, she said, or a provocation. Something designed to make me reactive instead of strategic. To pull you into a move you hadn't planned. Yes. She sat with that. The particular ugliness of it was in the construction. Not random cruelty. Engineered cruelty. Someone had looked at her existence in Mu-jin's life and decided that she was the optimal point of leverage, not because she was weak, but because Mu-jin's response to harm done to her could be predicted and therefore aimed. She was not the target. She was the instrument. Jin-ho has been with you for 8 years, she said. Yes, what changed? Mu-jin was quiet. That, he said, is the question I've been trying to answer for the last hour. He stood. He went to the window and stood with his back to her, looking at the city, and she looked at his back, the set of his shoulders. The particular stillness that was not calm, but was the thing that lived alongside a kind of anger so deep it had finished being hot and gone cold all the way through. I built something, he said. Over 20 years, I built something that required a specific kind of trust to function. People inside it who believed that the structure held. That loyalty meant something real. He paused. Either I was wrong about Jin-ho for 8 years, or something happened in the last period of time that turned him. And I missed it. Which is worse, she said. He turned around. Both are equally bad, he said, for different reasons. She stood up. She crossed the room to where he was standing, and she stopped in front of him, and she looked at his face. This face she had spent 3 years learning, the angles of it in different lights, the way it carried things. It wasn't sane. The way it sometimes failed to carry the things it was, and she saw something in it that she could not quite name, something that sat behind the control and the precision and the cold analytical machinery of how he processed threats. It looked like grief, not dramatic, not visible in any way that a stranger would clock. Just the specific small evidence of a man who had trusted something completely and was now holding the proof that the thing he trusted had been working against him and had chosen the most personal possible vector to do it. She put her hand flat against his chest. He looked down at it, then at her. "We're going to deal with Jinho," she said. "Yes." "And Kellen. And the senator. Yes. But right now I need you to stop running the calculations for 10 minutes and just be here." A long beat. Something shifted in his face. Something let go, very slightly, the way a fist unclenches by degrees rather than all at once. He put his hand over hers. 10 minutes, he said. They stood there. The city below kept moving, indifferent to all of it. Jinho was found at 6:14 in the morning, not hiding, not running, sitting in his apartment 3 miles from the building where he had worked for 8 years, at his kitchen table, with a cold cup of instant noodles in front of him that he had made and then not eaten, still wearing yesterday's clothes, with the look of a man who had been waiting for the knock and was too tired to be surprised when it came. Seok-yu brought him in. Han and one other man, no violence. Jinho came without resistance, which was its own kind of information. The shape of a man who had either made peace with what was coming or who had calculated that resistance would cost him more than it was worth. Mu-jin was in the secondary office, on the building's 4th floor when they arrived. Not his main office, the 4th floor room was smaller, functional, 1 table, chairs on either side, no windows. He had chosen it deliberately. Zahara was not supposed to be there. She was there. She had been at the building for 40 minutes by the time Jinho was brought in, having woken at 5, and found Mu-jin's side of the bed empty and the study door closed, and having made the decision quietly, without announcing it, to dress and follow. Mu-jin's driver had tried politely to suggest that perhaps she might prefer to wait at the penthouse. She had looked at him with an expression that made the suggestion evaporate. She stood at the back of the room, against the wall, arms folded, and she watched Choi Jinho be seated in the chair across from Mu-jin. Jinho looked at her when he came in. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw what was in his not defiance, not the aggression of someone who had committed to a choice and was standing behind it. Something more complicated. Something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like shame. She did not soften. Mu-jin did not speak for the first minute after Jinho sat down. He sat across the table with his hands folded on its surface, and he looked at Jinho with an expression that was so neutral. It was its own kind of pressure, the complete absence of legible emotion from a face that was always being read for information, suddenly offering none. Jinho broke first, not by speaking, just by looking away, down at the table, and the looking away was itself a kind of answer. "How long?" Mu-jin said. Jinho's jaw moved. He swallowed. 7 months, he said. Mu-jin did not react visibly. Zahara, from the back of the room, absorbed that number 7 months and felt the weight of it, the specific thing it meant. 7 months of Jinho inside Mu-jin's structure, with access to codes and schedules and the internal architecture of how things worked, operating under a different arrangement than anyone knew. "Who approached you?" Mu-jin said. "Does it matter?" "Yes." Jinho looked up. He had the eyes of someone who hadn't slept, who had spent the night sitting with what he'd done in a way that hadn't resolved into anything clean. "A man named Breslin," he said. "Raymond Breslin. He has a financial services front on the west side. The kind of operation that is very visibly legitimate and very quietly not." "Breslin works for Everett Royce," Mu-jin said. Jinho's expression shifted fractionally. Something like surprise, quickly submerged. "You already knew," Jinho said. "I knew Breslin's name. I didn't know he'd reached you." A pause. "What did he offer?" Jinho. "Money," Jinho said. Flat, tired, The word sitting there in the room, like something he'd put down and couldn't pick back up. And a way out. A way out of what? Jin-ho looked at the table again. His hands were in his lap, out of sight below the table's edge, and Zahara found herself wondering what they were doing, clenched, flat, shaking still. The body always doing something, even when the person tried to be composed. My sister, Jin-ho said. Something changed in the room. A degree of temperature, a shift in the particular quality of the silence. Your sister in Busan, Mu-jin said. There are debts. Medical debts. Our mother was sick for 3 years before she died last winter. The bills, he stopped. The muscles in his throat moved. I was managing it. I thought I was managing it. And then someone made it clear to me that the debt had been purchased. That a specific group of people now held it, and that there were 2 ways it could be resolved. Mu-jin looked at him. They weaponized it, Mu-jin said. Yes, you should have come to me. Jin-ho's head came up. There it was. The thing that had been living behind everything else in his expression since they'd brought him in. Not shame exactly. Something rawer than shame. The specific anguish of a man who knew exactly what the right choice would have been, and who had chosen, in the moment, not to believe that the right choice was actually available to him. I've been with you for 8 years, Jin-ho said. And I still wasn't. I couldn't know for certain that you'd... He stopped himself. His voice had started to fracture, and he pulled it back, visibly, the way you pull something back from an edge. Breslin told me you'd see it as leverage I was trying to use against you. My own debt. My own family problem. He said you'd think I was trying to create an obligation. Breslin told you that, Mu-jin said. Yes, and you believed him. The silence that followed was its own answer. Mu-jin sat back in his chair. He looked at Jin-ho for a long time. Zahara could see his profile from where she stood, the jaw, the line of his shoulder, the particular stillness that was not relaxed, but was its own kind of discipline. What were you asked to do? Mu-jin said. All of it. Not just last night. Jin-ho's hands came up onto the table. She could see them now flat, both palms down, the gesture of a man organizing himself to say something in full. He talked for 11 minutes. Zahara stood at the back of the room, and she listened to 7 months of it get laid out the information. Jin-ho had passed to Breslin, the schedules, the security rotations, the vulnerability windows he had identified and reported. Most of it was peripheral, structural information. Nothing that had resulted in a direct operation against Mu-jin's interests, not until last night. Last night was different because Breslin had been specific. He had given Jin-ho a date and a location, had told him exactly which alert to trigger and exactly when, had told him that someone was going to approach the woman at the diner, that it would be nothing serious, just something designed to create a distraction that would force Mu-jin to respond emotionally rather than strategically. Nothing serious. Zahara's arms tightened across her chest. Jin-ho's eyes moved to her when he said it. He heard it as it left his mouth. He looked at her, and she watched him understand the full dimensions of his own sentence, what it had cost her, what nothing serious had actually meant. In that diner, in that chair, with the sound of the clippers, and her hair on the floor, and 2 men laughing. I didn't know, he said, directed at her, specific. When Breslin described it, I thought it was going to be something else. I thought they were going to follow you, photograph you. Something that would give Mu-jin cause to... He stopped. His voice had lost whatever structural integrity he'd been maintaining. I didn't know what they were actually going to do. Zahara looked at him. She thought about what it cost to say I didn't know to the person who had been in the chair. She seen. She thought about whether it mattered, whether the distance between what he'd intended and what had happened was a meaningful distance, or whether it was exactly the gap that everyone who enabled something terrible stood inside of. Comfortable gap of not specifically asking what the plan was so that you could tell yourself you didn't know. She did not say any of this. She said, but you knew something was going to happen to me. Jin-ho could not hold her gaze. That was the answer. Mu-jin stood up. The movement was slow, unhurried, and that was the thing about it that made everyone in the room recalibrate, not the speed but the absolute control of it. The absence of any of the physical indicators of anger, even as the temperature of the room changed completely. You built something for them to use against my wife, Mu-jin said, because you didn't believe I would have helped you, even after 8 years. Jinho looked up at him. Tell me something, Mu-jin said. His voice had dropped to a register that was almost quiet, almost gentle, in the way certain very cold things feel almost warm against frostbitten skin. The night your mother died, you called me from the hospital. Do you remember? Jinho's face changed. You called me, Mu-jin continued, at 2 in the morning from a hospital corridor in Busan. You didn't have a particular reason. You just called. He paused. I talked to you for an hour. Do you remember what I said at the end? Jinho's jaw was working. I said, whatever you need, you come to me first. Not because I'm your employer, because I'm telling you now, before you need it, so that you don't have to decide since in the middle of a bad moment, whether or not I meant it. Mu-jin looked at him. You let them use your mother's death against you. Against me. Against my wife. Because you decided, after 8 years, that those words were probably conditional. Something broke in Jinho's face. Not dramatically. The way glass breaks that has been under pressure, the fracture appearing slowly. The pieces not yet moving, but the structure already finished. I'm sorry, Jinho said. The words were barely audible. Mu-jin looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said. He turned away. He walked to where Seok-gyu was standing near the door, and he spoke quietly, for a moment brief instructions. Jinho's disposition. The next steps in a sequence that Zahara understood in outline without needing to know the details. She watched Mu-jin's hands while he spoke. They were steady. That told her everything about what the next several hours were going to cost him, not the shakiness of someone undone. A sound green wood splitting, but the absolute control of someone who needed to hold themselves extremely still, because the alternative was something they were not willing to do. Seok-gyu nodded and said something back, and then opened the door, and 2 men came in, and Jinho stood up from the chair, without roughness, and walked out. He did not look at Zahara again on his way past. She watched the door close. The room was quiet. Jin stood with his back to her for a moment, and then he turned, and she saw his face in full for the first time since Jinho had started talking, and what she saw there was not what she had expected. She had prepared for the controlled blankness, for the disciplined non-expression that he wore in operational mode. She had not prepared for the simple, unmanaged exhaustion in his eyes, the particular look of someone who has just finished excavating something they needed to be true and found, at the bottom of it, exactly the thing they were afraid of finding. He crossed the room to her. She unfolded her arms, and he put both hands on her face palms, careful. A gesture that would have seemed too exposed for him in almost any other context, and he looked at her with an expression that contained everything he was not going to say out loud in this room, or possibly any room. Breslin, she said, yes. He's the connection between Jinho and the senator. Yes. If Breslin was running the operation, then Everett Royce wasn't just responding to his son's behavior. He was part of the architecture of what happened last night. Mu-jin's thumbs moved very slightly against her temples. Yes, he said. She let that settle. The senator. The warehouse alert. Jinho's 8 years of access and the single point of leverage a mother's hospital debt, a younger sister 300 miles away, that had been identified and purchased and deployed with the specific precision of people who had studied Mu-jin's organization and found the seam. They had not gone after Mu-jin directly. They had gone after the space around him, the people he trusted, the woman he came home to. They had mapped his vulnerabilities not by attacking his strength, but by locating everything that existed in proximity to it and applying pressure there. It was, she thought with a clarity that surprised her, actually intelligent. They know how you work, she said. Yes, well enough to build something that almost worked. Yes, she looked at him. What happens now, she said. He dropped his hands from her face. He turned to the window. There was a small one in this room, narrow, overlooking the building's side alley, and he stood looking out at the gray morning light with his arms at his sides and his hands open, not fists, just open. And she had the sudden thought that she had almost never seen him stand exactly like that, without his hands in his pockets, or at the back of a chair, or folded across his chest, without any of the physical armature of composure. Just standing, hands open, Everett Royce made a decision to come after my family, Mu-jin said. He did it because he thought the approach was indirected, that I couldn't trace it back to him clearly. He was wrong about that. A pause. But the fact that he was willing to do it at all, to go through Jin-ho, to use Kellen as the instrument, to put Zahara in a room with two men who he stopped. His voice had stayed level, but the words had run out momentarily, the sentence losing its foot at the edge of what he was willing to let himself say out loud. He turned back around. His eyes were clear and cold and completely decided. He thought he was operating inside the rules of how this city works, Mu-jin said. He thought there were limits to what I would do in response. Proportional limits, professional limits, the kind of limits that let people like Everett Royce make moves like this one, and then wait out the consequences. He looked at Zahara and his voice was very quiet and very final. He was wrong about that too. The morning outside was gray, and the city was beginning to make its daytime sounds, and somewhere in it, Raymond Breslin was starting his morning, and Senator Everett Royce was about to discover that his son had not come home last night. And the entire architecture of what they had built and believed was protected, was about to begin receiving the full weight of what Kang Mu-jin looked like when he had decided that limits no longer applied. Zahara looked at her husband's face. She thought about Jin-ho saying, I didn't know what they were actually going to do. She thought about herself in the chair, watching the clock, holding herself still through an act of will while her hair fell to the floor of a diner that had been the last clear space where she belonged only to herself. She thought about 8 years, meaning less than a debt that someone else had bought. She put her hand on Mu-jin's arm. Then show him, she said. Raymond Breslin's morning routine started at 7:15. Mu-jin knew this, because Jin-ho had told them, in the last 20 minutes of the conversation in the fourth-floor room, that Breslin was a man of rigid habits, the kind of habits that people developed when they operated in spaces where unpredictability was dangerous and routine felt like control. 7:15, a coffee shop 3 blocks from his financial services office on Weston Avenue. Same table, same order, same 40 minutes of reading physical newspapers because he didn't trust anything digital before 9 a.m. when his staff arrived and the day officially began. Seok-gyu was already on Weston Avenue by 6:50. Mu-jin arrived at 7:22, which meant Breslin had been sitting with his coffee for 7 minutes and had just opened the second newspaper, when the chair across from him was pulled out and occupied by a man he recognized immediately and whose presence produced, in rapid succession, the following sequence of physical responses: a tightening of the hand around the coffee cup, a controlled exhale through the nose, sound in, and then the very deliberate settling of his shoulders that people performed when they were frightened and did not want it to be visible. Breslin was 53, heavy through the chest and shoulders in the way of men who had been athletic 20 years ago, and still carried the frame of it even as the rest had gone soft. He had gray at his temples, and a nose that had been broken at least once and reset slightly imperfectly, and he looked at Mu-jin across the small table with the eyes of a man rapidly running calculations. Mr. Kang, he said. His voice was even, professional. The voice of a man whose value was his ability to be calm in rooms that had gone sideways. You had a busy night, Mu-jin said. He had not ordered anything. He sat with his hands flat on the table, relaxed, and he looked at Breslin with an expression of genuine interest, the expression Zahara had once observed that he wore when something was about to be resolved. Breslin looked at the door. A quick look, 1 second, then back. He had clocked Seok-gyu outside before sitting down. He was running options. I'm going to stop you from doing that math, Mu-jin said. There are 4 people within visible distance of this table. None of them are going to help you. One of them will follow you to your car, if you decide to leave, and that particular version of this conversation will be substantially less comfortable. Breslin put his newspaper down. What do you want? He said. I want to understand the scope, Mu-jin said. Jin-ho gave me the architecture. I want the scope from you directly so that I don't have to spend the next 6 hours verifying information piecemeal. He tilted his head slightly. Cooperating with me right now is the only version of this morning where you walk out of this coffee shop under your own power. Breslin looked at him. You're not going to do anything in here, he said. Too public. I don't need to do anything in here, Mu-jin said. I need you to talk to me in here. What happens afterward is a separate question, and its answer depends entirely on what you tell me in the next 15 minutes. Couple at the next table laughed at something. The coffee shop had the ambient noise of a normal morning, the hiss of an espresso machine, chairs scraping tile, the low murmur of conversations that had nothing to do with anything. Breslin picked up his coffee. He drank from it. He set it down. Royce came to me 14 months ago, he said. Mu-jin said nothing. He waited. He'd been watching your operation for a while. Not he didn't have specifics. He had patterns. The shipping contracts, the political adjacencies, the way certain city council votes went. He understood enough to know that you were more embedded in this city's infrastructure than people publicly acknowledged, and he wanted leverage. Not to expose you. He's not stupid enough to think that ends well for anyone. He wanted something he could use to manage you, keep you inside a certain operational boundary. He felt crowded, Mu-jin said. His words were that you were expanding into spaces that had existing arrangements. His arrangements, yes. What did he offer you? Breslin looked at the table. A beat. Access, he said. Federal-level contacts. 2 specific regulatory matters that have been problems for my business for about 3 years. He had the reach to make them go away. So he bought you with problems he'd probably created in the first place, Mu-jin said. Breslin's mouth tightened. The accuracy of that clearly landed somewhere specific. Plan with Jin-ho, Mu-jin said. Whose idea? Mine, Breslin said. Royce wanted direct pressure documents, photographs, something that compromised you directly. I told him direct pressure on someone like you produces a direct response, and that's not a war Royce could win. I told him the better approach was to make you reactive. Compromise your judgment, get you to move before you were ready. And you identified Zahara as the mechanism. I identified that your wife was the only variable in your life that operated outside your security structure. He paused. I want you to understand that the instruction to Kellen was not... Don't, Mu-jin said. The word was quiet. The word was a door closing. Breslin stopped. Tell me about the documents Royce is holding, Mu-jin said. The ones he was going to use to manage me. Breslin blinked. How do you... Because a man like Everett Royce doesn't pursue leverage without a second layer. He's too careful. Whatever he was using Jin-ho to build, there's a parallel operation documents. Recordings, something he believes gives him a position, even if the first approach failed. Mu-jin looked at him steadily. Where are they? Breslin was quiet for 5 seconds. Storage facility, he said finally, outside the city. It's registered under a holding company that traces back 4 levels before it connects to Royce. Physical copies, only he doesn't trust digital for anything he considers critical. The address Breslin told him. Mu-jin stood up. The regulatory matters, Breslin said quickly. His voice had lost its professional steadiness. What was underneath it was just a man who had made a series of calculations and was watching them fail in sequence. I said the answer to what happens to you depends on what you tell me. Mu-jin looked at him. You told me. We'll be in touch. He left Breslin sitting with his cold coffee and his newspapers in a coffee shop full of people who had no idea what had just occurred at that small table by the window. Outside, the morning had sharpened. The gray had lifted slightly, enough to let the low autumn sun work at the wet street. Seok-gyu fell into step beside Mu-jin as he walked toward the car. Storage facility, Mu-jin said. I have an address. I need a team there in 40 minutes. Done. Seok-gyu had his phone out before the sentence finished. And I need everything we have on Everett Royce's financial structure sent to the federal building on Commerce Street. The full package. Every document, every account trace, every communication log we've been building for the last 22 months. Seok-gyu looked at him. That package wasn't supposed to move for another 3 weeks. There are things in it that are still... Send it, Mu-jin said. Seok-gyu sent it. In a federal building on Commerce Street at 8:47 in the morning, a sealed package arrived via courier for a specific investigator whose name appeared on nothing publicly and whose case load was a matter of considerable discretion. The investigator opened it, read the first 6 pages, and made 2 phone calls, before finishing his coffee. Senator Everett Royce did not know about the package. He was dealing with the fact that his son had not come home. Call had come at 6 in the morning, not from Kellen, because Kellen's phone was not producing a signal, which was itself the specific kind of wrong that produced a cold weight in the chest of a father before any information existed to justify it. He had called 3 people by 6:15. None of them had answers. By 7, he had called Raymond Breslin and gotten no answer, and the no answer from Breslin was the data point that shifted everything from concern into something that used his whole body, not just his mind. He called his private security chief at 7:12. By 8:30, he knew that Kellen and Maddox were being held at a location his people could not identify. He knew that something had happened at a diner on Hadley Street the previous night. He knew, from what one of his people had managed to pull from a city traffic camera archive before the footage was somehow deleted, that a black armored sedan matching a vehicle registered to a Kang Mu-jin holding company had been present outside the diner. He sat in the study of his home, a house in the city's north end that belonged to his father, that carried in its walls the specific weight of 3 generations of accumulated influence, and he looked at the name Kang Mu-jin written on the notepad in front of him, and he understood that he had made a catastrophic misjudgment. He had believed that Mu-jin's attachment to the woman created vulnerability. He had built an operation around that belief. What he had failed to properly account for was the inverse, that the same attachment was the thing most precisely calculated to produce a response that operated outside the rules. Royce had spent 30 years learning to navigate. He had decades of political experience. He knew how to manage enemies. He knew how to absorb pressure and redirect it, how to outlast investigations, how to maintain institutional relationships that converted problems into manageable inconveniences. None of that translated. He was thinking about this, about the specific gap between what he knew how to do and what the situation apparently required when his secure phone rang at 9:51. Picked it up. Mu-jin's voice was calm and even, and carried the particular quality of someone who was not making a threat, but simply conveying information. "Your son is at the Mercer Industrial Processing Facility on Route 9, Mu-jin said. "He's unharmed. I'd like you to come." A pause. "Alone," Mu-jin said. The line went dead. Everett Royce sat with the phone in his hand for 30 seconds. Then he stood up and he got into his car and he drove to Route 9. The Mercer facility had been decommissioned 8 years ago. It sat on a flat stretch of highway 20 minutes outside the city, surrounded by the particular bleakness of industrial land that had been used hard and then abandoned concrete and chain link, and a sky that had nothing to interrupt it. In the winter, the wind came through without anything to break it, and the temperature inside the facility's main processing hall dropped low enough that the cold had a physical presence, the kind that found its way through clothing and settled in the joints. It was not winter yet. But October on that flat stretch of Route 9 was close enough that the air inside the facility, when Royce pushed through the unlocked side entrance and found his way to the main hall, hit him the way cold water hits someone who hasn't braced for it. He saw Kellen first. His son was seated against the far wall, zip-tied at the wrists, with a cut above his eyebrow that had bled and dried and was now the particular dark rust color of old blood. He was conscious. He looked up when Royce entered, and the expression on his face was not what Royce had expected, not fear, not relief at being found, but a complicated mixture of things that included something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. Maddox was 5 feet away from Kellen. He was in worse shape, both eyes were swollen, the right one nearly closed. He was conscious, but only barely, his head hanging forward and his breathing shallow. 4 men stood at intervals around the hall. Of them was Han Seok-gyu. Mu-jin was in the center of the room. He stood with no particular staging, no desk, no table, nothing designed to frame him in any specific way. Just standing in the cold of the decommissioned facility, in his coat, with his hands at his sides, watching Everett Royce walk toward him across the concrete floor. Royce was 61 years old. He was tall and well-built and had the specific bearing of a man who had spent decades occupying rooms where his presence was the organizing fact. He had been in difficult rooms. He had navigated hostile testimony and collapsed coalitions and the particular social violence of the political class eating one of its own. He was not a weak man, and he was not an inexperienced one. He had never walked into a room like this one. He stopped 10 feet from Mu-jin. They looked at each other. "My son," Royce said. His voice was even. He was working to keep it even. "Is unharmed," Mu-jin said. "As I told you. The other Maddox Vale made decisions last night that produced certain consequences. He's alive." Royce's eyes moved to Kellen. Kellen was looking at the floor. The guilt on his face had deepened. "You know what you're doing by holding them," Royce said. "The exposure this creates for you." "I've already sent 22 months of documentation to Commerce Street," Mu-jin said. "This morning. The exposure question is resolved." Royce's face changed. It was subtle. A man with his training and experience did not let his face break openly. But something behind his eyes shifted the specific look of a man who has just received confirmation of the thing he was most afraid of finding out, the look of someone watching the floor they thought was solid reveal its actual composition. "What documentation?" Royce said. "Everything," Mu-jin said. "The offshore structure, the funding arrangements, the 3 city council relationships that produced the waterfront rezoning, the federal contracts that were pre-awarded before the official process opened, the Breslin intermediary chain." He paused. "The conversation recordings from the Oak Street meetings in 2021. Royce was very still. "You were recording the Oak Street meetings," he said. "I was recording every meeting where your intermediaries were present from the moment I became aware that you were building a file on my organization," Mu-jin said, "which was 14 months ago. Which means I've had 14 months to build the counterfile. Which means that whatever you thought you had in that storage facility outside the city." He paused. "Our people arrived there at 8 this morning." The stillness in Royce's face cracked. It happened slowly. The way structural failure always happens slowly in things that were built to last the integrity. Going first, the visible collapse following after. His jaw tightened and then released, and the hand at his side made a fist that he opened again immediately. And for a moment he looked. Not like a senator, not like a man who had managed the machinery of power for 30 years, but like a father standing in a cold building, looking at his son zip-tied to a wall. "What do you want?" he said. His voice was rough now. Professionalism still there, but the smoothness gone out of it. "I want you to understand something first," Mu-jin said. "Before we talk about what this costs you." He took a single step toward Royce, and his voice stayed level and quiet in the cold of the facility. "You built an operation against my wife. You identified her as a vulnerability, and you used a man who trusts me to expose her to people who..." His jaw moved. "One small motion. What happened to her in that diner happened because you decided that the way to manage me was through her." Royce said nothing. "Say that you understand that," Mu-jin said. "I understand it," Royce said. "No. I want you to say what you understand." A long pause, the cold of the facility pressing in on everything. "Targeted your wife," Royce said, "and I used her to get to you. And the men you put in that room with her." Royce's eyes went to Kellen again. Kellen was looking at his father now. The guilt on his face had reached somewhere beyond expression. It was in the specific angle of his shoulders, the way his body was held. The posture of someone who was beginning to understand the full weight of what they had done, not as an abstract but as a concrete thing, with concrete consequences, for people they had not thought of as fully real. "They humiliated her," Royce said. "Yes," Mu-jin said. "I didn't instruct them to." "You put your son in a room with information about her, and the understanding that there would be no consequences," Mu-jin said. "The specific form the cruelty took was his. The environment that made it possible was yours." The silence that followed lasted long enough that the sound of the wind outside the facility walls became audible, the low, persistent sound of open land doing what open land does. "The documentation at Commerce Street," Royce said finally. "Is there," Mu-jin said. "Regardless of what happens in this room, it's there. The investigation that follows it will take its own course." He paused. "What I can control is whether additional material is added to it. Oak Street recordings, the Breslin to Royce communication chain that documents the operation against my organization specifically." Another pause. "That material, I can choose not to add. Royce looked at him. For what, he said. Your son pleads guilty to the assault. Not negotiated down, not restructured. What he did to Zahara in that diner is documented in a guilty plea that is publicly available. Mu-jin's voice was very flat and very final. Maddox Vale cooperates fully with the financial investigation that is about to open, which he will do because the alternative is substantially worse, and he is going to understand that when your lawyers explain it to him. He paused. Your political career ends. Your withdrawal from the Senate race is announced before noon today. The reason given is a personal matter. Royce's face was gray. You're taking everything, he said. I'm taking what you built on things you didn't have the right to build on, Mu-jin said. The same thing I told Breslin. And if I refuse... Mu-jin looked at him steadily. Then the Oak Street recordings go to Commerce Street this afternoon, he said. And the documentation of the operation against my organization goes to 3 separate journalists simultaneously. And what the Royce family has built over 30 years does not end with a personal withdrawal. It ends with every piece of it examined publicly and in detail. He held Royce's gaze. You know which version of this your son survives. Royce looked at Kellen. Kellen was looking at his father. The zip ties on his wrists, the dried blood above his eye. Expression of a 26-year-old man who had walked into a diner the previous night, believing that his name protected him from consequence, and who was sitting now in a cold facility on Route 9, watching his father negotiate the terms of everything that came next. Dad, Kellen said. His voice was rough, low, the voice of someone who needed to say one thing and could not locate exactly what it was. Royce looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Mu-jin. Your wife, Royce said. Is she don't, Mu-jin said. The word had an edge in it. The first edge. The first place where the control showed a seam. Royce stopped. Before noon, Mu-jin said. The withdrawal announcement. He turned. He walked toward the side entrance he'd come in through, and the 4 men around the rooms shifted to follow, and Seok-gyu moved to the wall where Kellen was secured, pulling a blade to cut the zip ties, and the cold of the facility pressed in from every direction, and Everett Royce stood in the center of it, with his hands at his sides. From the entrance, Mu-jin stopped. He did not turn around fully. Just a partial turn. His profile visible in the flat October light coming through the high windows. Your son thought a black waitress was beneath him, he said. That's what this started with. That's what I want you to sit with on the drive back. He walked out. Outside, the air was sharp and the highway was empty, and his car was idling at the facility entrance. Seok-gyu came out 2 minutes later and stood beside him. Kellen, Mu-jin said. Released. They'll need a vehicle. I had ours pulled back. They can call for one. The documentation at Commerce Street. Let it run its course, Mu-jin said. The investigation doesn't need us anymore. It has what it needs. Seok-gyu was quiet for a moment. Jin-ho, he said. Mu-jin looked at the highway. His sister's debts are cleared, he said. As of this morning. I had it handled before we brought him in. Seok-gyu turned to look at him. He still Gyu started. I know what he did, Mu-jin said. And I know why he didn't come to me. He paused. Both of those things are true at the same time, and neither of them cancels the other out. He got in the car. His phone showed 2 missed calls from Zahara. He called her back immediately on the first ring, before the car had even pulled fully away from the facility entrance. She picked up on the second ring. You didn't take me, she said. No. We're going to talk about that. Yes, are you all right? He paused. He looked at the highway through the windshield, the flat stretch of Route 9, the chain link and concrete of the facility receding in the side mirror, the open October sky doing what October skies do, which was to look enormous and indifferent, and completely uninvested in the specific struggles of specific people in specific cars below it. I will be, he said. A short pause on her end. Come home, she said. He was about to answer when Seok-gyu, sitting in the front passenger seat, turned around with his phone extended and an expression on his face that Mu-jin had seen perhaps 4 times in 8 years, the expression of a man who has just received information that requires an immediate reorientation of everything. What? Mu-jin said. Breslin, Seok-gyu said. He made a call after you left the coffee shop this morning. To Royce. No, Seogyu's voice was careful. To someone else. Someone we don't have a name for yet. The call lasted 4 minutes. 20 minutes after it ended, 2 of our vehicles near the Commerce Street building were forced off the road. Mu-jin's hand tightened around the phone. Our people. Shaken up. Not critical. A pause. But Mu-jin. Whoever Breslin called, they knew which vehicles. They knew the plates. They knew the route our courier took this morning. The car was moving through the flat October landscape, and the sky was enormous above it. And Mu-jin held the phone in his hand, and Zahara's voice was still on the other end of the line, waiting. And he understood with absolute clarity that what he had believed was the final move in this sequence was not the final move. There was someone else in it. Someone with a reach that extended inside his own operation in a way that went beyond Jinho, beyond Breslin, beyond Royce. Someone who had known this morning's movement and happened. Zahara, he said into the phone. His voice was very controlled and very specific. I need you to go to the secure room in the penthouse and stay there until I call you again. Pause. Move right now, he said. Zahara did not go to the secure room. She stood in the penthouse corridor for approximately 4 seconds. After the call ended, Mu-jin's voice, still carrying its specific controlled urgency in her ear. Right now. The secure room. Right now. And she looked at the 2 security men positioned outside the door. And she made a decision, this quality of decision she had made in the diner when she told Marcus to go home. Not impulsive. Not reactive. The decision of someone who has assessed the available options and chosen the one that feels most honest. I need the car, she said. Park, the younger one, opened his mouth. She looked at him. He closed it. The car was ready in 5 minutes. She used those 5 minutes to change out of yesterclothes, dark trousers, flat shoes, a clean shirt that didn't carry the smell of the diner or the antiseptic wipe, or the particular quality of fear sweet that she had been wearing since 11 o'clock the previous night. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror while she changed. The uneven patches of her scalp, the scabbed corner of her lip, the cord bruises on her wrists, gone deep purple overnight, the body's honest accounting of what the cord had done and how hard she had pulled against it. She looked for exactly 3 seconds, and then she turned away and finished dressing and picked up her coat and her phone and went downstairs. In the car, she called Mu-jin. He answered on the first ring. I told you. He started. I'm already in the car, she said. Tell me where you are. The silence that followed had a specific quality, not angry, not resigned, but the silence of a man recalculating, adjusting the parameters of a plan that had just received a variable it hadn't accounted for, which was his wife deciding not to be accounted for. Route 9, heading back into the city, he said. Commerce Street building. I'll meet you there. Zahara, there is someone in this situation we have not yet identified. Someone who had operational knowledge of my movements this morning before the morning happened. Until I know the full scope. Then let me help you find the scope faster, she said. I'll be at Commerce Street in 20 minutes. Another silence. She watched the city move past the window. The morning was hard and bright in the specific way of October. All light, no warmth, the kind of brightness that shows you the edges of things very clearly. Commerce Street, he said. 20 minutes. She was there in 17. The federal building on Commerce Street was institutional in the way that buildings designed to be unobtrusive sometimes became too deliberately plain, too carefully anonymous. The architecture of a place that was trying not to be looked at directly. She had driven past it many times. She had never stopped in front of it and thought about what it meant, which was that some percentage of the decisions that shaped this city's legal and political landscape were made inside it. Mu-jin's car arrived 3 minutes after hers. He got out and looked at her across the roof of the vehicle. She looked back. Neither of them revisited the phone conversation. That was a thing. They had learned do not avoid difficult things, but correctly sequence them, understanding which conversations needed the space that the current moment didn't have. Seok-gyu came around from the passenger side, with his phone already in his hand, and the expression she had come to understand as his highest alert register very still, very focused, the look of someone holding multiple threads simultaneously and feeling the tension in each of them. Both drivers are confirmed okay? She asked him directly. He glanced at her, then at Mu-jin. Mu-jin gave a small nod. Shaken. One has a wrist fracture from the impact. Not critical. Seogyu paused. The message was the point. Not the injury. Someone wanted you to know they could reach inside, she said to Mu-jin. Yes, he said. And they wanted me to know it immediately, before I had time to fully process the Royce confrontation. Before I could sit down with everything Jin-ho and Breslin gave me and look at the complete picture. He was looking at the building. They wanted me reactive, same objective as the diner. She felt that land. The diner was the opening move in something that had been running for 2 years. Everything since Jin-ho, the warehouse alert, Kellen and Maddox, Royce at the industrial facility had been built on the premise that Mu-jin could be made reactive if the right pressure was applied to the right point. And the right point, as identified by someone who had spent 2 years studying him from the inside, was her. The routing data on Breslin's call, she said. The relay node. Who built your network? The two men looked at her. She waited. Daniel Rhee, Mu-jin said. She absorbed the name. She had met Daniel Rhee perhaps 6 times, over 3 years, a quiet man, technically fluent, in ways that made him seem to speak a slightly different language from the people around him, present at meetings without being particularly visible in them. She had thought of him, on the occasions she had thought of him at all, as someone whose value was in the infrastructure rather than the human elements of what Mu-jin ran. A builder, a systems person, which meant he knew exactly where every system was and how every system worked, and critically, where every system was vulnerable. 11 years, Mu-jin said. He said it quietly, not to her specifically. Just saying it out loud, the number, giving it the space that a number like that required. He's not running, she said. It was not quite a question. Mu-jin looked at her. No, if he were running, he'd have been gone before this morning. So he's waiting, she said, for you to come after him in a specific way that he's already planned for. Mu-jin was quiet. Then don't, she said. They built the message in the car, parked 2 blocks from the Commerce Street building that the 3 of them, Mu-jin, Seok, Zahara, working through the logic of it with the specific collaborative focus of people who needed to get one thing exactly right. The message had to be credible. It had to go through the compromised node. It had to offer Daniel Rhee something worth coming out for. The Harmon Street property was the right choice because it was real. The safe was real. The documents were real. And if Daniel had been monitoring Mu-jin's operational movements for any significant period, he would know the property existed, and would understand that the documents in its safe were precisely the kind of material that Mu-jin would want secured before a major legal process began moving around him. He'll check it against everything he knows about your pattern, Zahara said. It has to feel like something you'd actually do, not a message. An action. It does feel like something I'd actually do, Mu-jin said. Then it'll work, she said. The message went out at 11:43. They were in position on the parallel street at 12:30, parked in a vehicle Daniel wouldn't recognize, with a feed from 2 cameras on Seok-gyu's phone. The October afternoon had thinned out to the kind of light that made everything look slightly exposed, slightly underdressed for the temperature. Zahara watched the feed. At 12:51, a car pulled up half a block from the Harmon Street entrance and Daniel Rhee got out. She watched him move the specific quality of his movement, careful and systematic. A man who checked his environment the way people checked their environment when they had been trained to treat it as information. He looked left, looked right, held for a moment, and then pushed through the entrance door that Park held open from the inside. Came alone, Seok-gyu said. Yes, Mu-jin said. That means he doesn't know what he's walking into. Or he does, Zahara said, and he came anyway. Both men were quiet. She felt the weight of that possibility in the silence. A man who came anyway, knowing it was a trap, was a man who had made a decision about what he wanted the end of this to look like. That was its own kind of information, and it needed to be received correctly. Move, Mu-jin said. They were through the Harmon Street entrance in under 4 minutes. Daniel Rhee was on the 2nd floor in the main room, standing in the center of it, hands visible at his sides, not having touched anything. the posture of a man who had arrived somewhere with a specific intention, and the intention was to show, with his body, that he was not trying to take anything, or destroy anything, or run. Mu-jin stopped in the doorway. The distance between them was perhaps 15 feet, and it contained 11 years. Zahara positioned herself against the side wall, not behind Mu-jin, not tucked away present, visible herself. Daniel's eyes moved to her first. She watched him see her not just recognize her face, but actually see her, the cord bruises visible above her cuffs, the scratches on her scalp, the split lip. She watched him receive the physical evidence of what the operation he had helped design had produced in its most human form. Something crossed his face. She identified it accurately and without softening it. Shame. Not performed. Not strategic. The specific, unmanaged quality of genuine shame in someone who had been carrying it and was now in the presence of the thing that produced it. She did not look away. He looked away first. Then he looked at Mu-jin. "I knew the message went through the node," he said. "I knew what that meant. And you came," Mu-jin said. "Yes, sit down." Daniel looked at the chair near the wall. He went to it and sat, and the act of sitting, of choosing the posture of someone who is not about to run, was itself a form of statement. Mu-jin did not sit. He stood with the specific contained quality that was his version of presence in rooms where things were being decided, and he looked at Daniel Rhee with an expression that Zahara could not fully read from her angle, but whose effect on Daniel's was visible. The man's shoulders dropped slightly, the last residue of whatever managed composure he'd maintained dropping away, leaving something more honest in its place. 2 years, Mu-jin said. "Yes. When did they first approach you?" "A meeting, framed as a business consultation. A technology firm looking to audit its communication security. I didn't know it was connected to Royce until the second meeting, when Breslin was in the room." Daniel paused. "By then, I had already said enough that walking away wasn't clean." "They had you," Mu-jin said. "They had enough," Daniel said. "Enough of my words, out of context, that could be constructed as something damaging." "Yes. So the 2 years was not entirely voluntary." Daniel looked at him. "The first 6 months, no," he said. "After that." Something shifted in his face. "After that, I had enough information that I could have come to you. I knew enough to construct a defense, to give you what I had, and let you deal with Breslin on terms that protected me. I chose not to." "Why?" The question was quiet, not accusatory. The genuine inquiry of a man who needed to understand the full shape of a thing in order to know how to hold it correctly. Daniel's hands were flat on his thighs. He looked at them. "Because I was angry," he said. The word sat in the room. "Angry," Mu-jin said. "I had spent 11 years building something that worked," Daniel said. "Every system, every network, every piece of infrastructure that keeps this operation functioning, I built it. I maintained it. I updated it when it needed updating and rebuilt it when it needed rebuilding. And none of it exists. Not publicly, not officially. Not in any form that the world outside this organization can recognize." His voice had something in it now that was not quite bitterness and not quite grief, but sat somewhere between them. "I'm 40 years old, and I've spent the best years of my professional life building things that don't have my name on them, that I cannot point to, that I cannot use to prove that I am someone who made something." Mu-jin was quiet. "You felt erased," Mu-jin said. "I felt like I had traded my professional existence for loyalty to something that couldn't acknowledge me back." He paused. "Royce offered me a way to have a name, a real one, in the legitimate world, and I was angry enough at the right moment to take the offer without thinking through what taking it actually meant. It meant giving them Zahara," Mu-jin said. The room went very still. Daniel looked at the floor. "Not I didn't give them her specifically. I gave them pattern data, her schedule, the location, the gap in your security coverage." He paused, and then said with the honesty of someone stopped protecting himself from his own sentence, "Which is the same thing." "Yes," Mu-jin said, "it is." Zahara pushed off from the wall. She walked to the center of the room. Not fast, not aggressive, just walking to where she needed to be, which was in front of Daniel Rhee, close enough that he had to look at her directly. He looked at her. She studied his face the way she had studied faces across diner counters for 3 years, reading what was actually there, not what she wanted to find or was afraid to find. She saw the exhaustion, the shame, the specific look of a man who had been living inside a bad decision long enough that the decision had become a weight he carried in his actual body, in the stoop of his shoulders and the quality of his stillness. She saw all of that, and she decided, with the same quality of decision she had been making all day, to say the thing that was true rather than the thing that was comfortable. "You knew my name," she said. "Yes." "You knew where I worked." "Yes." "You knew why I worked there, what it meant to me." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "And you gave them the information anyway." "Yes." She let a moment pass. "I'm not going to tell you that it's all right," she said. "Because it isn't. What happened in that diner is going to be in my body for a long time. The way certain things get into your body and stay there, regardless of what your mind decides about them." She paused. "But I'm also not going to stand here and tell you that the anger you described isn't real. That what you wanted to have your work recognized, to have a professional identity, to exist visibly in the world, wasn't a legitimate thing to want." Daniel was very still. "You made a wrong choice in service of a real need," she said. "Those two things are both true, and neither of them cancels the other." She looked at him steadily. "The relay node. Can you clean it completely?" He blinked. The shift from what he'd expected to what she'd asked took a moment to register. "Yes," he said. 6 hours, 8 if there are complications." She turned to Mu-jin. He was looking at her with the full attention that she had never, she's never fully gotten used to, and suspected she never would, the look that made her feel like the most important variable in whatever room they were in together. Not in a way that was about control or possession, but in a way that was simply about weight, about what mattered most. "The node has to be gone," she said. "All of it. Clean." "Yes," he said. She stepped back. Mu-jin looked at Daniel. 8 hours, he said. "Shiokyu stays with you through the process. When he confirms it's clean, you walk." He paused. A long pause, the kind that carries things that aren't being said. "The consultancy Royce promised you. I'll have someone reach out to you in 2 weeks with a legitimate contract. Technical consultation. It will be real work, real clients, your name on it." Daniel stared at him. He started. "Don't," Mu-jin said. "Don't tell me you don't deserve it. I know what you did, and I know what it cost. I'm not offering it as absolution. I'm offering it because the need was legitimate, and I should have seen it 11 years ago and offered it then." He paused. "You should have come to me. You didn't. We're both going to have to live with the specific shape of that." Daniel Rhee looked at Kang Mu-jin for a long moment. His eyes were wet. Not crying the specific threshold just before crying, when the eyes fill and hold, and the person manages, barely, not to cross over. He nodded once. "Thank you," he said. The 2 words carrying the weight of 11 years, and 2 wasted ones, and everything that existed in the gap between them. Seok-gu moved from the door. "Let's go," he said to Daniel. Not unkind, just forward they left. The room was quiet. Mu-jin stood in the center of it and looked at the door they had walked out of for a moment. And then he looked at Zahara, and the expression on his face was the one she had seen in the 4th-floor room after Jin-ho stripped back, unmanaged. The face under the face, but different now because it contained something that the Jin-ho moment hadn't, a kind of recognition, the look of a man who is seeing something about himself that he hadn't seen clearly before. "I should have known," he said. "About Daniel. About the need. That he had it." He paused. "I built an organization that required people to operate without visibility, without credit, without public acknowledgement of what they did or who they were. I built that structure deliberately because it was necessary, and I never thought carefully enough about what it cost to cost-blames the people inside it." She looked at him. "That's a true thing," she said. "And it's also true that people should come to you when they need something, instead of building secret architectures in the dark. Both of those things exist at the same time." He held her gaze. "I keep learning that from you," he said. "What?" "That 2 things can be true at the same time, and neither of them cancels the other." She recognized her own words from 10 minutes ago. "You were listening," she said. "I always listen to you," he said. They stood in the room that had just held a confrontation, that resolved something, without making it easy, without making it clean, without pretending that the resolution erased the cost. The October light came through the high windows at a low angle, the specific light of late afternoon beginning its turn toward evening, and it landed on the floor between them in long rectangles that would shorten and disappear as the hour moved. "Let's go home," she said. The relay node was confirmed, completely dismantled, at 9:14 in the evening. Seokyu's message was brief, clean, all of it. He's gone. Mu-jin read it standing in the kitchen of the penthouse. He set the phone on the counter. He stood with his hand flat on the granite for a moment, not doing anything, just standing, letting the confirmation settle into him the way things settle when the last piece of something moves into place. Then he poured 2 glasses of water, carried them to the living room, and sat beside Zahara on the couch. She had her legs drawn up, her feet tucked under her, looking at the city below the glass. She took the water without comment, drank half of it, set it on the table. Everett Royce withdrew from the Senate race. "At 11:58 this morning," Mu-jin said. "I saw it on my phone in the car," she said. The announcement was 3 sentences. Personal matter. Effective immediately. No further comment. His lawyers will have a complicated few weeks. Kellen? The plea arrangement will take time to formalize. His lawyers will try to negotiate the framing. It won't get much ground. He paused. What he did is in the documentation. His own voice on the phone to his father, talking about what he was going to do, recorded from a nearby relay before Seokyu's team swept the diner. He paused again. He laughed when he described it. She absorbed that. She thought about Kellen Royce on the phone to his father, laughing, and she thought about herself, in the chair, watching the clock. And she thought about the specific quality of cruelty that exists in people who have never once been made to feel the weight of what they do to others. Not born cruel, exactly, but shaped into it by the uninterrupted experience of consequence-free behavior till cruelty became just another form of entertainment. Maddox Vale, she said, is cooperating fully. He gave the investigators everything he had on Royce's financial structure within 6 hours of being released. He was very motivated, because the alternative was worse. Substantially, she was quiet for a moment. "Marcus," she said. Mu-jin looked at her, the cook, from the diner. "He's 19. "He's fine," Mu-jin said. "My people confirmed it that night. He went home. He's been working a shift at a different place since yesterday morning." His brief pause. "He's okay." She let out a breath. She had not realized she had been holding that particular concern until the moment of releasing it. Marcus, with his scrub brush in the kitchen doorway, 19 years old, face going through its rapid, frightened sequence, and her telling him to go because the alternative was him being in that room for what came next. She had made the right call. But the right call and the worry about the person the call concerned were 2 separate things that had both been living in her since last night. "Good," she said. The city below the glass did what the city did. At this hour, the particular visual language of a metropolis at evening, all those lit windows stacked and scattered across the grid, all those specific and unknowing lives happening simultaneously inside the vast structure that held them. She had grown up looking at a version of this skyline from a different angle, from below rather than above, from a neighborhood where the tall buildings were something you looked at rather than something you were inside of. Splitting. And the visual distance between those 2 positions was one of the things she had spent 3 years trying to hold in her mind at the same time without letting either one erase the other. "Jinho's sister," she said. "The debt is cleared. I confirmed it this morning before we brought him in." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the floor, glass in both hands, forearms on his knees. The posture of a man who had been moving continuously since before sunrise, and had finally stopped and was now feeling the full accumulated weight of everything the stopping revealed. "You cleared it before you even confronted him," she said. "Before you had the conversation. Before you knew what he would say, or whether he'd be honest. The debt was a legitimate need," he said. "His sister didn't create it. His mother got sick. That's not a thing that should be weaponized." He paused. Clearing it was the right thing to do, regardless of what Jinho had done. She looked at the side of his face. He told you at that hospital in Busan that he'd come to you if he needed something, she said. And then when he actually needed something, he believed you didn't mean it. Yes. And that's the thing that's sitting heaviest on you. He was quiet for a moment. I told him something true, he said. And he had 11 years of evidence that it was true, and he still didn't believe it when the moment came. Which means he stopped. Which means that somewhere in how I built, what I built, I created an environment where people who worked inside it couldn't be sure that the things I said to them as a person were separable from the things I was as an organization. They couldn't tell the difference between Mu-jin, who ran something, and Mu-jin, who meant what he said in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning. She set her water glass down. She turned toward him fully on the couch, angling her body so she was facing him, and she waited until he looked up from the floor and met her eyes. That's a real problem, she said. I know, and it's yours to fix. I know that too. I'm telling you because I want you to hear it. Said plainly, not because I think you need me to explain it to you. She held his gaze. You're the most perceptive person I know in most circumstances. But there are specific things about how you affect people that you can't see clearly because you're inside them. He looked at her. The security arrangement, he said. Starting tomorrow. You said you wanted to talk about it. Yes. I'm listening. She had thought about this on the drive back from the Harmon Street building, watching the city through the window while the evening came down over it. She had thought about what she actually wanted, not the version of it that was a reaction to what had happened. Not I want to be free of all of it, which was a feeling rather than a plan, but the actual thing, the real arrangement that was honest about who she was and who he was and what the life they had built together actually looked like. I want people who are mine, she said, not assigned from your structure. Not people who report to Seok-gyu and then to you. People who work for me, chosen by me, with a primary accountability to my safety and my decisions. She paused. I want to know their names and their actual situations. I want to be someone they're protecting because they're connected to me, not because they're fulfilling a rotation. He was listening. I'm not going back to pretending, she said. Not going back to the diner situation where I maintain an ordinary life inside a fiction of separation from what our life actually is. That fiction didn't protect me. It just made me available to people who thought ordinary meant powerless. She paused. But I'm also not going to live inside a security structure that treats me like an asset to be managed. I'm not a package. No, he said. You're not. I'm your wife, she said. And I'm also myself. Those are both true at the same time. Yes, he said. So the arrangement has to reflect both of those things. Okay, he said. And he meant it, she could hear, that he meant it in the specific quality of the word, the absence of any qualified edge in it, just the genuine agreement of someone who had been given a clear requirement and was accepting it without negotiation. There's one more thing, she said. He waited. The diner, she said. Pause. What about it? I know it's gone. I know that's already done. She looked at her hands. I'm not asking you to bring it back. I'm not asking you to undo what you did. She paused. I want you to understand what it was to me before I tell you what I want to do about it. Tell me, he said. She thought about how to say it accurately. I had a life before you that was hard in specific ways, she said. Not tragic, I'm not telling you a tragedy. Just genuinely hard. The kind of hard that teaches you things that an easier life doesn't. The kind that puts a certain kind of knowledge in your body about what you're capable of when there's no other option. She paused. The diner was connected to that time. Not because I needed to keep struggling, I didn't. But because I needed to keep knowing that I was the woman who had gone through that time and come out of it still functional. Still capable of a full day's work. Still someone who could talk to a 19-year-old kid about his girlfriend problems and mean it. She paused again. Does that make sense? Yes, he said. The diner being gone means that specific thing is gone. I can't go back to it. I'm not going to have that particular anchor anymore. She looked at him. What I want instead of the diner is something that isn't pretending. Something that is actually mine, connected to what our life actually is, where I can put my hands on real work and do something that comes from who I actually am. Not a performance of ordinary. Something real. What do you want to do? He said. She had thought about this too in the car, watching the city. I want to open something. she said. A legitimate food operation. A real one. In my name. Connected to the parts of this city where people actually live, not the parts where people perform living. She paused. I'm a good cook. I understand service. I understand what it means to make a space where people feel taken care of without feeling managed. She looked at him. And I want it to be completely legal, completely above board. Nothing connected to your structure. Mu-jin looked at her. Something moved through his face, slow, genuine, arriving from somewhere deep. It was not surprise exactly. It was more like recognition, the look of someone seeing a thing they had somehow known was there without knowing specifically what form it would take. Yes, he said. I haven't even told you where or what specifically. I know, he said. Yes, anyway. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. She stood up from the couch. She went to the bathroom. She turned the light on and stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself fully, without the 3-second limit she had imposed on herself earlier in the day. The uneven patches of scalp, the tracks the clipper had left, the scratches healing at different rates, the split lip, scabbing at the corner, which would be gone in a week, the cord bruises on her wrists, which would take longer. She looked at all of it. She thought about Kellen Royce clicking the clippers on and the deliberate way he had done it, the savoring quality of it, the performance of a cruelty designed to strip away something he had identified as central to her dignity. See, she thought about sitting in the chair and watching the clock and making the decision not to let it cost her more than it had already cost her. She thought about what it meant to finish it herself. She went to the cabinet under the sink. She found the straight razor Mu-jin's, good quality, kept clean. She found the shaving bowl and the brush. She ran the water until it was warm. She heard him in the doorway before she saw him. She looked at his reflection in the mirror. He looked at what she had laid out on the counter. He looked at her face. I'm going to do it myself, she said. He nodded once. He came to stand beside her, not behind her, not over her, but beside her, which was the correct position. The one that said, I am here, not in charge of this. Picked up the razor. The first stroke was slow. She had done this before, not to herself, but her mother had kept a shaved head for several years. When Zahara was a teenager, a choice made after a bad haircut that she had decided to turn in something else, and Zahara had helped with it many times in the bathroom of a small apartment that smelled like cooking and damp laundry. She remembered the technique, the angle, the pressure required. She worked from the top down, left to right, slow and deliberate. Each stroke removed what Kellen had started. She was not undoing it, she was completing it, but on her terms, with her hand holding the instrument, with her decision governing the pace and the direction and the meaning of what was happening. Mu-jin stood beside her and did not speak. She did not want him to speak. She wanted exactly what he was giving her, his presence, without his interpretation of it. The warm water, the clean strokes, the mirror showing her the work as it progressed. When she finished, she set the razor down on the edge of the sink. She rinsed her palm and ran it slowly over her scalp, smooth, entirely smooth now, with the scratches from the clipper's nicks standing out clearly against the clean skin, small and healing and honest. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her head was bare. Her face was unchanged, the same face she had always had, the one she had grown up with, the one she had brought into this marriage, the one that had been in that chair, looking at that clock. The scars were visible. They would be for a while. The doctor in her told her the practical, clear-eyed woman who had learned to assess things honestly, and then they would fade, the way most things faded, with sufficient time and sufficient distance, into marks you could find if you looked for them, but that no longer organized the whole picture around themselves. She looked at herself, and she saw herself, not a victim, not a survivor performing recovery, not the woman who had been in the chair, or the woman who was trying to escape what the chair had meant. Just herself, standing in a bathroom at the end of a very long day, with her head bare and her eyes closed, the city outside the window going on, with its enormous indifferent life. Mu-jin was looking at her reflection. She looked at his. I'm still me, she said. He held her gaze in the mirror for a moment. Yes, he said. Not "you're beautiful" or "it doesn't matter," or any of the dozen things a person said when they were trying to reassure someone out of a feeling, instead of simply confirming what was true. Just yes, direct, complete, requiring nothing added to it. Turned off the water, she turned around and looked at him in person rather than in the glass. He looked tired, genuinely, deeply tired, the specific fatigue of a man who had been running at full capacity for 20 hours straight and had finally arrived at the place where the running was done, and the body was presenting its bill. He had managed everything: Jin-ho, Breslin, the Harmon Street building, Daniel Rhee, Royce at the industrial facility with the disciplined efficiency that was both his greatest strength and the thing that had contributed to Jin-ho, and Daniel not believing he was also a person underneath it. Person who could be talked to about real things at 2 in the morning and mean it. She put her hand flat against his chest. The same gesture she had made in the bedroom the night before, just contact, just the physical fact of it, just presence without demand. He put his hand over hers. They stood in the bathroom for a moment that didn't require anything from either of them. Then she said, "Come sleep." He said yes. They lay in the dark, and the city made its nighttime sounds below the glass different from its sounds, more dispersed, the particular audio texture of a city that never fully stopped, but did change pitch and density with the hours. She lay on her back. He lay on his side facing her, his eyes closed. She could hear his breathing slow and deepen into sleep within about 4 minutes, which was fast even for him, and Bolt told her something accurate about how depleted the day had left him. She lay awake for a while longer. She thought about Everett Royce in his study, the night after the news of his withdrawal had gone out, sitting with the weight of what his political career had been and what it had ultimately cost. She thought about Kellen, wherever he was tonight, a hotel, probably, with his lawyers already structuring the story, the damage control, beginning its particular kind of laborious work. See that scene. She thought about what it meant to be 26 years old and have the night at the diner be the fixed point that everything else in your life was now organized around. She thought about Marcus, working his new shift somewhere, 19 and fine. She thought about Jin-ho's sister in Busan, who did not know that a debt had been cleared by a man she had never met as the last move in a sequence of events she would never fully learn. She thought about Daniel Rhee, wherever he was tonight, with 8 hours of clean work behind him and a contract coming in 2 weeks that would have his name on it. She thought about the diner, not its absence, not the loss of it, but the thing itself, the specific and actual place, the cracked tile near the back booth, the wobbling stool, the fluorescent light with its particular buzz, the coffee machine with its slow drip, the way the light looked at 11 p. With the blinds down and the open sign flipped too close. She let herself think about it completely, not reaching for the feeling or pulling back from it, just letting it be there in full. It had been hers, it was gone. She was still here. Those two things were both true, and neither of them canceled the other. Closed her eyes. The city kept its nighttime conversation with itself below the glass, and Mu-jin breathed steadily beside her, and the room held them both in the particular quiet of a place where something had been survived not cleanly, not without cost, not without the marks that would be there when you looked for them, but survived, fully and completely, in the way that things were survived by people who had decided, in the specific moment when the decision was required, not to let it cost them the essential thing. She was not the same woman who had walked into Ray's diner for her closing shift the night before. She was not trying to be. She was the woman who had been in that chair and had watched the clock and had held herself together through an act of will that no one would ever fully know the dimensions of, except her. She was the woman who had not cried when they wanted her to cry. She was the woman who had told her husband the truth in a car in the dark about what the diner had meant and why it mattered. She was the woman who had walked into rooms she had not been invited into because the decision being made in those rooms concerned her and she had the right to be present for it. She was the woman who had stood in front of Daniel Rhee and said the thing that was true rather than the thing that was easy. She was the woman who had finished what Kellen started with her own hand, at her own pace, on her own terms. She was Zahara Whitlock. She was Zahara Kang. She was both of those women completely. She had always been both. She had simply spent too long believing that being one required apologizing for the other. Outside, the city continued its enormous life, unaware of any of it. The Royce name would be in the papers tomorrow. The investigation had unfolded over months, generating its particular institutional momentum, reaching its own conclusions in its own time. The diner on Hadley and Ninth would appear in a small report as an unremarkable electrical fire in an unremarkable building, mourned briefly by the people who had been regulars, and then absorbed into the general texture of a city that was always losing and rebuilding small things. Everything would continue. She breathed in. She breathed out. She slept.